Hey guys, I just want to apologize in advance for some of the sound quality in this video. There's a lot of background noise and interference that got to be a little bit much for me while I was editing. I think what had happened was the microphone that I use has like a stand that it goes in, and it was in the stand while I was using it for the video, and what you're hearing is like it sort of like knocking around in the stand. Yeah, again, sorry in advance for that. If it gets to be too intolerable for this video, then um, you know, sorry about that. I will try to do better. But thanks for watching.
What's up, everybody? It's Will coming at you with another belated monthly roundup. This month I get a relatively short roster of movies here, only a few, but let's go ahead and get into it. The first movie up on our list is Mad God, which is a stop motion animation movie from Phil Tippett in his directorial feature length film debut, if you don't count the made-for-TV Starship Troopers 2. Phil is somebody who has spent his career working behind the scenes as an animator, creature designer, and all-around special effects guru on movies like Jurassic Park, Starship Troopers, the original Star Wars trilogy, and this movie is essentially his 30-year passion project that he started on in 1990 between working on these more conventional, studio films, and it kind of gave him an opportunity to, actually direct like a real sort of creative vision. It also provided an outlet for his depression that he was dealing with at the time. But he ultimately shelved it because with the advent of CGI, he felt like stop motion animation was going to be rendered irrelevant. But 20 years later, he ended up being wrong and revisiting the movie, and after a successful Kickstarter campaign, was able to secure the funds that he needed to complete the movie. It finally got released at a festival last year and dropped on Shudder, the horror film streaming service, this past month. Having finally seen this movie, I can understand why it took as long as it did to complete. First, it opens with a quote from Leviticus that very nicely sets the tone for the movie, where God talks about unleashing famine and war and disease on his subjects, exponential to their disobedience. And there's even one line in it where he says, "I will not smell the savors of your sweet odors." It's easy to forget how truly petty the Old Testament God was. Then we see this figure donning a gas mask and the sort of steampunk outfit being lowered into this barren post-apocalyptic hellscape. And as he traverses it, it becomes more dark and violent and grotesque and just hellish. And you've realized pretty early on this is not a conventional dystopian science fiction movie where two factions are fighting against each other. I mean, that's definitely an element of it, but ultimately the sort of dystopian post-apocalyptic genre that this movie falls under is just kind of this rickety framework that Phil Tippett uses to explore these bigger issues of depression and life and death, and really just what it means to live in this very cruel world. I mean, you see these kinds of lumbering monsters doling out these just completely sadistic and meaningless acts of cruelty on these kinds of faceless humanoid figures, and it feels like a metaphor for what it feels like to live in just a very cruel and sadistic world. So yeah, I don't have a ton else to say about this movie. I mean, obviously, it's a lot to take in for a first viewing. Um, I mean, I was very impressed by it and its level of craftsmanship and passion, and just, I definitely did enjoy it. I would be curious to see how it holds up for subsequent reviewings, because I think what stops it short of being a full blown masterpiece is that because it is so relentlessly kind of grim, um, it did get to a point where, the more I've thought about it, the more sort of alienating it is. But just because it's such a colossal achievement, honestly, of art house filmmaking, and something that I really did enjoy for my first viewing, I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have Elvis, starring Austin Butler as the king of rock and roll. And this is the first movie in 10 years from Australian maximalist filmmaker Baz Luhrmann. And it's pretty much exactly what you would expect from a Elvis Baz Luhrmann movie, to the extent that that you know what you're going to expect from an Elvis Baz Luhrmann movie. I mean, it's just very colorful and manic and over the top. And I actually saw it twice, but ironically enough, there were things that I really did not like about it the first time I watched them that were definitely smoothed over the second time. So I'm going to spend the duration of this review talking about what those things were, why they bothered me the first time, and why they didn't really bother me that much the second time. So the first thing that bothered me about this movie when I first saw it was the editing. Now, here's the thing about editing. Editing is, to me, the most underrated aspect of filmmaking. It sets the pace for the movie, it sets the tone of a scene, and it gives every moment its weight. And it really is half the movie. Now, my boy Boz has a very particular style of editing his movies, where conventionally, if you're editing a movie, let's say you have a scene where person A is talking to person B, the camera is more or less going to focus on person A while they're talking, and then cut to person B while they're talking. But what Boz does is he will, let's say person A is giving a line of dialogue, he'll focus on them and then cut to person B, and then maybe cut to person C, and then an object, and then back to person A, all in the space of 2 seconds. And so I first noticed that back when I saw The Great Gatsby in theaters with my high school English class. And I remember when we left the theater, I was like, what is up with that style of editing, where he'll cut 4 times while somebody is talking? And I remember my teacher, Miss Waters, who's a big Baz Luhrmann fan, said it's a stylistic decision that Baz Luhrmann makes to essentially put you in the mindset of a character, and kind of has the camera focus on the things that they're focusing on. And I just kind of remember thinking okay, that makes sense in a theoretical way, but I don't know if I really fuck with it, right? And that style of filmmaking was definitely very present here, and it really did bother me the first time I saw Elvis. And if you had asked me to describe the editing in one word the first time I saw it, I would have told you it was incessant. But I think what smoothed it over for me the second time was just it really does kind of give you a sense of whiplash, but it's a controlled whiplash, and it speeds up and slows down with the pace of each scene, and it reaches its highest velocity in the musical performance scenes, which I think are by far the best scenes in the movie because they really capture the exuberance and the energy of those musical performances and what it was like to see Elvis at the height of his career. So, yeah, I like I said, didn't really bother me the second time. In fact, I'll go a step further and say that I actually liked that aspect of the movie the second time I watched it. And then the other thing that bothered me initially was, so music biopics all seem to follow a pretty rigid formula where first you see the band slash musician kind of struggling to get famous, but then they have that big hit song or big hit performance, and then they blow up, and then the record label approaches them and is like, Freddie, I'm going to put your band on the map. And then everything's peachy, and you see this, montage of them like performing around the country, and then, usually there's this like struggle between like artistic integrity and commercial pressure, and the band slash musician usually ends up going with artistic integrity and become the more commercially successful for it, or at least like, even if they're not, we as the audience know that they made the right choice because, hey, now their music has a legacy, now their music has staying power. And then there's this usually an inevitable descent into drugs and or alcohol and or promiscuous sex, which is then usually followed by this redemptive arc, and then the whole thing closes out this big, kind of show. And Elvis pretty much follows that formula verbatim. And it did bother me when I first saw it. But I think what helped me the second time was just that, Baz Luhrmann his very sort of exuberant style of filmmaking, I think, helps take source material that would feel very orthodox in anybody else's hands and makes it feel very unorthodox. And I don't know, it just didn't really bother me as much the second time that I saw it, and I really kind of came to appreciate it. And ultimately the whole thing is just anchored by Austin Butler's absolutely titanic performance as Elvis. I mean, I know I haven't really talked about it in the review, but like, I haven't really felt like I need to, because it's incredible, and it really is as good as everybody has said it is, and has also made me even more excited for Dune Part 2, since he's been cast to play Fade Rautha. And I think the thing that I appreciated the most about it was that he really gives Elvis a sense of humanity. And I think that this movie's biggest strength is that it takes this pop culture figure who has essentially become a punchline, even though he had like a really tragic and fucked up life, and it gives him a sense of humanity. And I honestly think that's a really beautiful thing. So, really enjoyed it, kind of came to love it. I would give it a enthusiastic 4 out of 5 stars. And finally, we have The Black Phone, starring Ethan Hawke and directed by Sinister and Doctor Strange's Scott Derrickson. This is, as far as I know, the first time I've seen Ethan Hawke play a villain where he plays a child murderer, and the plot centers around one of his victims who is being held in a basement, and there is a disconnected black phone that allows him to communicate with his kidnapper's former victims. I remember watching the trailer for this a few months back and not thinking much of it. I actually thought that it was only going to get a streaming release on HBO Max, but here we are. It's been in theaters for a couple of weeks, and by any objective standard, has definitely not just come and gone. It's made $80 million on a $17 million budget, and probably still has some gas left in it for a theatrical run. And while I'm always happy to see an independent non IP movie make money and receive a warm reaction, that doesn't mean that I myself personally loved it. And it's kind of a shame because it's hard to pinpoint why. I mean, I do think that it's well directed, well written, well acted, especially from the two lead child performances. But there just wasn't really anything about it beyond that elevated it above anything beyond just mild enjoyment for 90 minutes. And that's not to say that there weren't things that I didn't like about it. I mean, it's based on a short story from Stephen King's son, and it feels very much like really like a template for a Stephen King movie, which I think is a good thing. And I also liked the attention that was devoted to Ethan Hawke's character, who ends up becoming a pretty compelling villain. He kind of gets off on playing these mind palace games with his victims, which I thought was really interesting. I also liked the dream sequences with the sister character, and I also think that this movie had a really strong ending, but there just wasn't really anything about the overall sum of its parts that would bring me back to it, over and over and over again. So, and there were some things that, I could pinpoint that I didn't really like. I mean, ultimately, it's just not really that scary. I mean, there were a couple well-crafted moments of suspense and one very cleverly executed jump scare, but I just didn't really think that overall it was very scary. And then there was also this thing with the sister that I thought was going to lead to some kind of plot resolution, but then it just kind of didn't. So that bothered me a little bit. And I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm happy with the reaction that this movie has gotten. I think that Scott Derrickson is somebody who has a vision. It's just that, and I think that if you are a horror fan, this is worth checking out. But, it wasn't particularly memorable for me. So, yeah, I give it a solid 2.5 out of 5 stars. And that's it. That is my June roundup. So follow me on all of the social medias and the TikToks and the Twitters, and just copy my last name. It is Will Messenger, but the O is silent. So it's Messenger, but with an O. Thanks for following. Tell me what else I should watch. Tell me what you think of these movies. And I'll see you in the next video.